Tonight, Scott Snyder decides to turn Mr. Freeze from a troubled lover to a troubled stalker. Superman of Earth 23 decides to go full-on quest for peace. And the Ravagers. That's the joke. All that and more tonight on the Not So New 52. Hello everyone and welcome to episode 39 of the Not So New 52. I am your host and hey, we made it to another fifth week. Yes, it is that time again where we only have 3 comics to talk about and then I have to go back and cover all the stuff that I skipped before. But hey, what would I have skipped before? I'll tell you what, a bunch of backup stories. A bunch of stories that were included in the back of issues in order to justifiably bump up the price a little bit and tell some other thing that wasn't connected to the main thing. So I'm going to be covering all that. The big one for this month is we are starting off Shazam, which is a super duper uberly long story that's going to be stretching over the Justice League backups for the foreseeable future. But chapter 1 through 3 will be in this episode. But before we get to any of the backups, let me tell you the 3 main comics that we will be discussing this week. On May 30th, 2012, we have 2 annuals coming from Batman and Animal Man, one of which is technically a Night of the Owls tie-in, but that doesn't make a lot of sense. The other issue that we have is issue number 1 of the Ravagers, the team from the Culling, which we all know I loved so much. Damn it. So yeah, we will go ahead and get into that, and once we are done with the main 3 issues, I will be back to talk to you about specifically what backup stories we will be covering. But first and foremost, let's kick it off with Batman Annual number 1. Batman Annual number 1, written by Scott Snyder and James Tynion IV, art by Jason Fabok. This is ostensibly a tie-in to Night of the Owls, but, it isn't. Look, it's not. It apparently happens on the same night, but it's not. So, anyway, it's a Mr. Freeze story. So, we got, over 30 years ago in Nebraska, some big iced-over lake, and young Mr. Freeze and his mother are going to some snowman building competition, and he's all excited. He's like, "Oh, we got to build a big one, and we got to do whatever." And his mom's like, "Okay, but we're going to decorate it using this lone apple because that's the way we tradition or something like that." And he's like, "Okay, fine, but we're going to make them huge, bigger than me." And then he looks behind him and realizes his mother isn't there. And as he goes back, we see that she had fallen through the ice, and she is now, trapped down there. And then we see that this is a flashback, I guess you'd say, into Mr. Freeze doing a therapy session. And it is midnight, more or less, on the Night of the Owls. And his therapist is talking to him, basically saying, okay, yeah, my mom survived. The ice preserved her. Therefore, that's my backstory on why I like ice so much. And we get into basically what happened in the Red Hood tie-in to Night of the Owls, where Mr. Freeze was apparently making the tech that allows the owls to come back from the dead, or at least preserve them. However, they betrayed him and tried to kill him, and he got caught by Red Hood, and now he's in Arkham. So they're talking to him and just like, "Oh, well, is this anything like Nora, that woman who you so much love?" And he's like, "Let's not talk about that anymore. We need to move on from that." And so he asks what the time is, and it's apparently, midnight. And he asks for the therapist's crown, which apparently was made out of alcohol so that Mr. Freeze can't freeze it. Which apparently he has just general ice powers, but he also he's able to freeze things with himself, but maybe only slightly by touch. He also has a freeze gun, which is able to do it wider. I think that's his power set. It's not well established. Regardless, he goes up to the therapist, snaps his neck, steals the crown, breaks into the vent above him, and then uses it to basically short-circuit the freezing nodule in his room to make it even colder in there. And the security guards are taking notice, and they're like, okay, well, Mr. Freeze's cell is super freezed, and we've always been using his, like, cell in order to AC the rest of the asylum, but he's turned that off, so it's dropping super fast in there. So we got to get someone in there to stop him. So they send in some armed guards, and Mr. Freeze takes one of the, like, Freon tubes, sprays it all over all the guards, freezes them instantly. He snaps off one of their fingers, and then he just takes a little sip from the Freon, just keeping it in his mouth. So then he walks down the hall to some other guards who are waiting for him. He has his hands up as they're telling him surrender, and he's like, the guard's like, all right, take it slow. Wait a minute, do you have something in your mouth? And he just sprays it at them, and it immediately freezes them all, which I feel like is a bit much. Like, it just seems like a bit much, but regardless, it freezes them. He walks up to an authorized, like, storage room, uses the finger from the guard that he broke off to get in, and inside is his suit, his, like, dome suit. So then he breaks out using some food services truck, and he's on his way to the Iceberg Lounge. And he breaks through the front door with the food truck, steps out, and Penguin's immediately like, dude, I thought we were cool. I thought we were friends. Why did you come here? The cops are obviously right behind you. Why did you wreck my place? And Freeze is like, hey, so, yeah, we're cool. I did this so that you can pass it off to the police as a robbery. So, you know, like, I broke in here and I stole some of your money. And you could just tell him that, and I'm sure you'll be insured for whatever. And he's like, all right, yeah, that tracks. Yeah, no, totally cool. So, what's going on? And he basically, first off, Freeze threatens Cobblepot, and it's like, did you know that if a bird, like, freezes even the smallest bit of its toe, it will die? I know this because I did a lot of freezing experiments. So you want to know what I'm after? I'm after my freedom. I'm getting out of Gotham because owls and bats, they all suck. I'm grabbing Nora and we're leaving Gotham. And Cobblepot's like, all right, cool, here's your gun, kept it safekeeping for you. And as he's about to leave, Cobblepot's like, oh, wait, you probably should, take care of a few guys if it's supposed to look like an actual robbery. So Freeze just casually kills a few of Penguin's henchmen because they're both dicks. So then we get a flashback to 6 years ago when Bruce Wayne first met Victor Freeze. And he was a cryogenic tech at Wayne Tower Laboratories, and basically he was just going on and on. He's like, I am doing so much incredible work here on bringing back these cryogenically frozen people. And Bruce Wayne's like, I thought I shut that down. Did I not shut that down? I thought that we were working on some other stuff. And Victor's like, oh, but we can do both. We can work on the other stuff and work on this. I'm making great strides. And he's like, yeah, all right, look, I'll let you keep going, but you're going to be under close examination because I don't think this is a good place to spend money. And he gets all emo about that. And Bruce tries to apologize, but he's like, look, sorry, bye. So then Victor walks over to one of the cryogenic pods, and we see that it is Nora, the woman that he loves. And he's like, I will bring you back. I will. It will not take much longer, my love. I will wake you up like a princess from a storybook. And so he makes his way back to the same cryogenic pod in Wayne Tower. And when he wipes off like the condensation, he sees that it's some random-ass dude in there. And he's like, oh, Bruce Wayne just messed up my night. And then he looks behind him and he sees Nightwing and Damian, Robin, and they're basically just like, yeah, no, we moved her months ago, or, Bruce Wayne did, and the only reason we haven't moved all these people is because not a lot of places want to take human icicles. So he's just like, look, tell me where Bruce Wayne is, tell me where Nora is, and I will not kill you both. He's like, yeah, that's not going to happen. So fight scene happens. Dick gets encased in ice briefly. Damian jumps over and tries to tackle Mr. Freeze, but he gets like a hand on his wrist, and as such it starts freezing it and like giving it frostbite, and he's like, tell me what I need or else I'm going to break the boy's hand off. And over the intercom, Bruce Wayne talks, and he's like, let him go, Victor, I'm up in the penthouse and I have Nora up here. So he drops Damian. Nightwing starts breaking his way out of the ice, and they're like, should we follow him? And he's like, nah, Batman wants to take care of this one-on-one. So back to the flashback. Victor's finally got a compound that he's willing to test out to bring back Nora, and as soon as he's about to, Bruce steps in. He's like, no, you're not going to do that. You are literally trying an untested, unsafe compound on somebody who cannot possibly give consent. I'm not going to allow that in a private setting. And he's like, no, you don't understand. This is my wife. I have to. And he's like, no, we're done here. I'm shutting this down. I've called the authorities. You'll be escorted off the property. And he's like, you can't do this. I won't let you. And he throws a chair at Bruce, which then ruptures one of the cryogenic freezing tanks, sprays all over Victor, which takes him out. And then he wakes up again. He's being operated on by a bunch of doctors. And they make some offhanded comments of like, oh, his cells are storing cold. If he feels any heat at all, he would likely boil, blah, blah, blah. Stuff like that. And when he finally wakes up, they put on some goggles on him because apparently that's what's keeping his eyes from freezing in their sockets. Okay. And he breaks out looking for Bruce Wayne. But anyway, he gets up to the penthouse. He's looking around. He sees Nora there, but then Batman breaks in and he's like, it's over. Bruce Wayne is safe. I sent him somewhere else. This is between me and you. And he's like, get out of my way. That's my wife. I will freeze you to death. And he goes to do that. But then Batman's just like, here's the thing, Victor, and this is a big thing. Like, I remember when this was a thing here. This isn't his wife. It's Nora, but Nora is not his wife. It is a random woman who was the first woman to be cryogenically frozen, and Victor did like all of his research studies on her and her life and whatnot. So he fell in love with her, but she has never met him. She's just there, which I'll get to in the end. So Batman says all this, and he's like, whatever, shut up. I'm just going to go ahead and free my wife now. Shut up. And so as he's about to, do this, he lets it go on Batman just because he's all pissed off that Batman's speaking the truth. And Batman unloads that perfect formula thing into Victor's, suit, which then starts heating him up, and he starts, dying. Batman doesn't let him die, but it gets him off the table long enough. So they say they'll bring him back to Arkham as Victor just outstretches a hand towards Nora. And then we get one last glimpse to his childhood of his mother. After having fallen through the ice, she has severe mental deficiencies, like she's not there anymore. And he's pushing her in a wheelchair across the lake. He's like, oh, are we going to the snowman building competition? Victor's like, yes, mother. And she's like, what about our apple? And he's like, we'll get one there. And he's like, oh, never mind, I have one here. And we see that her hand is just covered in blood. And so then Victor gives her a kiss and pushes her through the same hole in the ice. I don't know how long of a period that was between then, but regardless, pushes her through the hole in the ice and she dies. The end. Okay. Art's beautiful. Jason Fabok, fantastic. Writing, very good. I'm a fan of all the stuff that they were doing there in terms of they were doing a good backstory of his childhood and then his work when he is a doctor. All fine. There is the issue of his wife thing, which is something. Personally, it's not the biggest thing to me. I never had that big of a thing for Freeze in terms of he needs to have this dedication. But I do know that it is a major part of the character post animated series. And it's to undo that and make it so that he is literally just crazy, that still doesn't sit right. It's not a huge thing for me, but it doesn't sit right. So yeah, I'm going to say misstep on that one, which is fair because I don't think they ever kept it in canon. I think it pretty much was ignored from then on, and they were just like, no, that's his wife. Moving on. So overall, I'm going to go ahead and give this one I'm going to give it an 8. Besides that misstep of just a bad decision, the story itself being told is good. It's solid. Why it needs to be Night of the Owls tie-in got me, but yeah, it's fine. It's a good story and perfectly reasonable to have it as an annual. The Ravagers, #1, written by Howard Mackie, art by Ian Churchill. This is a new team spinning out of the smash hit of The Culling. Hooray. And honestly, it's a bunch of people that, like, I only kind of know. So we open up, we're in the Antarctic, and some narration is just going over, like, what if I'm not good enough? What if I can't save these kids? As something crashes into the ice, and we see that it's the Ravagers, our new team, which consists of scientist Caitlin Fairchild, who can also, like, Hulk out, some weird beast thing named Ridge, Thunder and Lightning, who have energy powers, Terra, who can move Earth, and Beast Boy, who is red now for some reason. Also 2 other people that essentially act as the Suicide Squad members that just die immediately. So they all jump out of this crater, and they're like, all right, we're going to have to... We got to get on this if we're going to survive. We're out in the middle of the Antarctic, and Harvest is hunting us. And honestly, the entire narration's all from Caitlin's perspective of just constantly saying, like, what if I can't do this? So just know that's a constant running theme throughout this. So anyway, they land, and they get their bearings for a second and realize, okay, we've managed to get out, and we're somewhere in Alaska. That's where we're at currently. So we just need to make our way towards civilization. And everyone's like, why should we trust you, Caitlin? You literally have been working with the enemy for years. And he's like, I worked to infiltrate them. I was always on your guys' side. And they're like, we don't trust that. So then the 2 that are basically the throwaway members, one of them's named Bright Eyes, and the other one I genuinely looked and I don't think was ever given a name. So they just fly away. And then Terra and Beast Boy are like, hey, we don't really care about this team. Like, we don't care about the trust thing, but we don't care about this team. We're going to go. And they leave as well. And so Ridge is then talking to Caitlin. She's like, oh, all right. So you spent 4 seconds as the leader and you've already lost 4 members. So maybe I should take over. And she's like, psh, like, I'm never going to let you take over. And then he freaks out because I guess she's making some comment of him looking like a monster. And of course, he only looks like a monster because of the stuff that Harvest did to him. So, you know, he's actually just a dude underneath with some anger issues. And Caitlin's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, but I promise you that I will make things right. Let me go. And he's like, all right, whatever. So he tosses her aside and says that if anything else happens, any, like, lie at all that she's caught in, he will kill her. So the rest of the team is just standing around like, all right, so what do we do now? And as they're thinking, some pods emerge from underneath the ground, aka where the base was, and we see some security guards step out. And they're all fully on, and they're like, all right, looks like we got to fight again. And security guards are like, no, hey, like, that base is gone. We were just following orders. We're just laying down our guns. We want to come with you guys because the place was crazy. And immediately Thunder and Lightning are like, after everything you did to us, you think that we're just going to let you go with just following orders? Hell no. And they start unleashing energy blasts on, like, all of these security guards, pretty much with the intent to kill them. So then we cut off to the 2 Suicide Squad members. Again, they're not actually, but you get the point. And they're being followed by this giant nowhere warship. And they try shaking it off their tail because I guess Bright Eyes' powers is that she can make flashes of light from her eyes. I can't imagine why she's not sticking around. And the other one can fly. But they make the comment like, oh, we can slow him down, but we can't shake him. At least not for both of us. And then the flying guy just throws Bright Eyes into the windshield of the war carrier. So it's like, sorry, I'm on my own here. Bye. We see inside, and they have Rose Wilson and Warblade are the 2 that are tracking these guys down. And they're like, all right, get them. Alive or dead, doesn't really matter. So Warblade deals with Bright Eyes, who was just still clinging to the front of the windshield. Like, she wasn't even a threat, but Warblade just stabs her through the stomach, and she falls off and dies. Supposedly. We don't actually see her dead. And then Rose jumps off the plane, lands on the flying guy, and goes for the kill there. Again, supposedly. So then we get back to the battle between the security guards and the Ravagers. And I'm just going to... They don't officially have that name yet, but it's the name of the book. And they're on the cover of the book. So I'm just going to take that as is. And Caitlin's like, no, they were surrendering. Please, you have to be better than this. And he's like, it's tough. So they keep on fighting them. Caitlin eventually hulks out because I guess she can only maintain it for a certain amount of time. And she jumps in the fight, and she grabs Ridge, and she's like, Ridge, look, you have no idea how much I just want to beat up everything when I'm in this Hulk form, but I control it because it's the right thing to do. And we're just like, what are you even, tell me what you want to say here. And she's like, could you please, act as a better role model for the kids? And he's like, fine, I guess. So he gets in the way of the other ones beating up the security guards and stops them from killing each other. Until finally the other one left is, I think it's Lightning. And she's just still laying into one of them, and Thunder comes up and is just like, stop, you can be better than them. And she's like, fine, okay. So they just leave the security guards pretty much left for dead in the Alaskan wasteland. And Caitlin's like, all right, don't worry, guys. My plan is about to kick in. I hacked one of the Nowhere ships, and it's going to come here and pick us up. So they look out on the horizon. This giant Nowhere ship is coming in. And they're like, I really don't trust this, that we're going into a big warship owned by the guys who, did all this experimenting on us. And she's like, yeah, well, I didn't have a lot of time to pick out the ship, so you're going to have to trust it. But before they can do anything, the ship starts veering off, and it just crashes into the ground. They're like, it seems that somebody hacked my hack, and now we're not going to be able to get out of here with that. Oopsie. So then we cut over to actually, it's not even cut over. Apparently, out of the ship comes Warblade and Rose. Again, I don't know if this is like the ship that they were originally on. It sounds like they were on a separate ship. But regardless, they step out, and they're ready for a fight. And more internal monologue from Fairchild. It's constant. It's literally on every page of just, what can I do? So they're getting ready for a fight. Two of the members that I genuinely had not seen before step up, and they're like, we surrender. Please don't kill us. And then Rose and Warblade go ahead and kill them because they have to prove they're so evil. And then we see the rest of the team is standing off at the edge of this cliff. And Caitlin has Thunder use his energy powers to, sever off the piece of the cliff, like Wile E. Coyote style. And they all crumble down into the ocean. Away from Rose and Warblade, but to their watery deaths. And that's where we leave off. Okay. I mean, there are 52 books at DC, mainline titles. Not all of them are going to be smash hits. I understand that. I understand that not all, but this one feels so it feels like something that was contractually obligated, where it's like, hey, I'm doing this event called the Culling, and out of it, I'm setting up this new team. Can I have a guarantee that no matter how the event does, I'll have this team? And they're like, yep, no problem. And as such, the event didn't do much. And as such, this team doesn't do much. But we're stuck with them for at least 6 issues. So art is okay. Art is actually pretty good, all things considered. It does have a little bit of the same issues in... I feel like it's coloring. It's either pencils or colors. One or the other, and I can't place it, but I think it's coloring. That's just feels a little bit off to me. But regardless, it's good. It's good art. Writing, though, however, Jesus, I couldn't care. I couldn't even begin to care. So I'm going to go ahead and just give this one I'll give it a 6. And that's a very low 6. That is exactly a 6. And the only reason that I hesitate is that it hasn't technically done anything that wrong yet. It hasn't made me angry. The only thing that was kind of blah was just that constant narration of, what can I do? But besides that, it's an okay book, and I can at least see where it goes from here. Animal Man Annual number 1, written by Geoff Lemire, art by Timothy Greene II. This specifically says that it takes place after Animal Man number 9, so picking up right after that. It's basically just a history lesson on a prior time that the Rot, the Green, and the Red all fought against each other. So we open up in Colorado, where Maxine and her grandmother are sitting in the RV waiting for her mom and Cliff. And Socks the cat speaks up and is like, excuse me, Maxine, could you let me out? I need to take care of some business. She's like, what do you mean? She's like, I gotta pee. Can you let me have some dignity, please? So Maxine goes out with Socks into the woods. The grandmother's like, stay close, don't get too far away. And as they get out there, Maxine's just basically asking questions about the Red, how everything works, and clarifies that Socks was previously an avatar of the Red, and though nothing super eventful happened in his time, there have been times where the rot has risen up before, and it's a cycle sort of thing where the rot needs the red needs the green needs the rot, and vice versa. And it's all part of a system that has to coalesce, but every time that one of them rises up, the other two have to come together to bring it down. So checks and balances. But Maxine basically just wants to hear a story of a previous time that the rot rose up. So we pick up in an old mining town, I believe. No, sorry, a near logging town in Manitoba, Canada, back in 1894, where a famine was just sweeping through the entire area. The cattle were dropping dead and like bubbling up, as the rot tends to do. All of the food was going bad, and no one could figure out what was going on, but there was something like in the air, something dark around there. And there was a farmer named Jacob Mullen who was trying to figure out why his crops kept dying, and he figured, some sort of pestilence or something like that. His kid comes out named Henry, trying to talk to his dad, wants to help figure out what's wrong with the fields. But his dad's like, no, you got to go inside just in case this is something bad. I need you to be there to watch after your mom and your sister. So as they're talking, the rest of the townsmen show up, and they're basically going out into the woods because they feel that it's somewhere around the nearby lake, Stone Lake, that this sickness is coming from. So they're going out into the woods with a couple of Mounties to figure out what's going on. So Jacob hitches up his rifle, heads out with the Mounties, and they head out to the lake, and he says goodbye to his wife and daughter and his son because he doesn't want them coming along. So they make their way out, and as they go deeper and deeper into the woods, they find all these decaying corpses of animals. All the trees are completely leafless. It's just a dead zone. Nothing else is there. And Jacob is feeling this headache. He's got this pain in his head, and he's not sure what it is. So as everyone's looking around a little bit, they realize the sun is setting and they got to set up a camp. They're going to start a fire. But with all the decaying corpses of animals, they're worried that there's some sort of beast out here, some sort of monster that is taking these things. So they're a bit hesitant to set up any sort of fire. But the Mountie's like, hey, look, there's nothing supernatural, nothing crazy out here. We're still, mankind. We're still top of the food chain. We can take care of anything that comes this way. And we're gonna need the fire because we're gonna burn down all the infected parts of these woods tomorrow morning. So they set up the fire, they go to bed, and then all of a sudden Jacob shoots up in his sleep saying how it's coming. And before they even really have time to react to what's going on, Jacob starts bleeding out of his eyes the same way that Animal Man did. And they hear a voice from the other side of the woods, and it's one of the Mounties has been possessed by the rot. His intestines are on the outside, and they're screaming like, oh, you will soon be one with the rot. You will soon join us. So Jacob Mullins is still just trying to figure out what's going on with his face and blood. And at that point, the vessels in his arms and legs are all turning bright red. And out of the woods appears a whole bunch of rot creatures that are coming after to kill all the men around. And they're coming after Jacob, but before they can get to him, the Swamp Thing of that era shows up. And he says, do not touch him. And he grabs Jacob and starts just running through the woods trying to protect him. So Jacob passes out from all the shock. When he wakes up the next day, he's outside of a cabin of, let's see if I remember this, old Jack Crow, who was an Indian trapper hunter. And it turns out that this Swamp Thing is actually Jack Crow. He was summoned by the Parliament of Trees, and he became the new Swamp Thing. So we show he pulls out like an old, as far as I can tell, like fermented potato, and he's like, here, eat this and you will see. Basically just taking him on a trip. And we see the history of he was fighting off the rot, and he had his fire set up. The rot came after him. He unloaded a few shots with his rifle. He fell into the fire, and as he did so, he got up and ran into the lake to put himself out. But when he did, he was captured by the Greene and made into the new Swamp Thing. And he was shown the history of everything, all of the rot stuff, all of the green stuff, and what his new goal needs to be. And he was made aware that Jacob is the avatar of the Red, in which he has control over animal life, and he's the protector of that stuff. And then Jacob, he looks like he's listening to Swamp Thing, but he's like they come back into the real world. But it turns out he's still seeing visions, and Swamp Thing's like, "What are you seeing, Jacob?" And Jacob sees a future world, the current day world, completely in shambles. All these skeletons with like Batman skeleton, Superman skeleton, Flash skeleton, all of them just dead on pikes in the middle of a city. And he's like, I don't know what I'm looking at here, but I see death. And then as he's seeing this, he sees Buddy Baker. Like, in his head, he sees Buddy, and he's like, look, it's going to keep happening. You can't stop it now, but like, we aren't enough. We aren't enough to do this. And he's telling this to Jacob, and Jacob's like, who are you? I have no idea what's going on. But as Buddy is recounting, like, they took my family, my wife, my children, and that snacks Jacob out of it, where he's like, oh no, Uncle Lars and Aunt Beru. And he runs back, to Star Wars reference. So he runs back to his own home. He uses like the power of the wolf in order to get back there faster. But as he arrives into town, he sees that all of the townspeople have already been converted by the rot, and they're all coming after him. They're all attacking him. And as he's beating him up, he sees standing off to the side is his wife and child, also converted by the rot, his daughter, mind you. And he's like, they start launching after him, and he's forced to fight back. But in the end, he doesn't have to, because Swamp Thing shows up and starts using his vines and stuff to attack all the people, and basically just kills them all. He just takes them off the table. And Jacob's like, you killed everyone. He's like, no, they were already dead, but they're now returned to the earth, and we don't have to worry about it. But then Jacob realizes that his son isn't there, so he uses his flight powers to go back to his actual like homestead. And when he lands there, Swamp Thing shows up next to him. And as soon as Swamp Thing shows up, he's shot in the head. Doesn't do anything, mind you, but we see that it's Henry. Henry has a rifle, and he's protecting several of the townsmen here at this at their homestead. And he tried to protect his mom and his sister, but they were taken, and he couldn't do anything about it. So at this point, the Mountie shows back up again along with one of the other guys, and they are the Hunters 2, which are, as the Swamp Thing says, are stronger. The rot is more pure in them than all the other people. They are essentially elite soldiers of the rot. So Animal Man and Swamp Thing just go ahead and fight them off. And as the Hunters have taken possession of people, of actual humans, part of the Red, Animal Man still has some control over them because he controls the Red, and he literally pulls the remaining Red from the rot, so it separates out the two pieces of the body, essentially just completely destroying them. But of course, they just return back to the rot whence they came. They aren't dead, but the vessels that they were in are. And basically, he's like, all right, I think we're safe for now, but they're not gone. I can still feel them. And Swamp Thing's like, yeah, but they probably aren't going to show back up during our lifetime. Like, you did a pretty effective job there, so I think we're good to go. So then we see Jacob standing over the graves of his wife and daughter, and everyone else in town is gone. The land is barren. It's completely dead. So they are going to... The son's like, should we move on? Should we move? And he's like, no, we're going to stay here, and we're going to make this land fruitful again. We're going to do what we can. So then we see the Swamp Thing. He stops by, and he causes some land to, grow up flowers and whatnot. So it's not completely dead. But then we cut over back to Maxine, who's hearing the story from Socks, and basically she's like, that's such a sad story. And he's like, what do you mean? We won. We beat the rot. That's a good thing. She's like, yeah, but that guy, he lost his family, and all those people died. And Socks is like, look, this battle that you're going to fight, not everyone's going to come out of it. Every fight worth fighting is going to come at some cost. So, yeah. And she's like, well, I think that's sad. And she's like, all right, well, make no mistake, Maxine, war is coming. And that's where we leave off, is that, Maxine has a better idea of what she's dealing with. I thought this was fantastic. I think that Timothy Greene does a fantastic job of mimicking the art of Travel Foreman while still putting his own little thing on it. It looks it looks just different enough, like you can tell it's a different artist, but it is just close enough to the style that it feels similar, you know? The only time that I could really tell the difference was when Buddy showed up, and that's just because he doesn't look the same as he does when Travel Foreman's doing the art. So, but story-wise, it's, you know, a good little history lesson, because, I mean, this whole thing has been going on for eons of Rot versus Red versus Greene. It's good to see one of the previous battles and get an idea of, like, what is going to have to be done, what the end goal here is. So it's never a complete eradication. It's just getting things back into balance. And I think that that's something that hasn't been touched on yet. So overall, I'm going to give this issue an 8. I really did enjoy it. I think it's part of just a already incredible larger run, but I can't fault it for anything it did. So while it is an 8, it is more or less just keeping up to the expectations that I have for this book in general. So we will see the continuing adventures in issue number 10. And that's it. That's all the comics that came out from DC Comics this May 30th, 2012. But of course, we are not done. We are now into the backups, all of the books that have been released over the past 3 months that have not been covered for one reason or another. So let me just give you a quick rundown of what to expect. This is in no particular order. We have Justice League, which we will be getting chapters 1 through 3 of Shazam. We have Detective Comics, which has the first 2 parts of a 3-part story involving Two-Face called Welcome to the Dark Side and 50/50. We have Batman, which has part 1 of the story Fall of the House of Wayne, focusing on Jarvis Pennyworth. We have 2 Action Comic stories, one featuring Steel in the events going on during Action Comics number 7. The other is focusing on President Superman of Earth 23 during his issue. We have a story from Men of War, despite the fact that that ended last month, I believe. There was one backup story in issue 7 that we need to cover real quick called Survival Mode. We have GI Combat, which isn't technically a backup story, but it is the second part of the issue because it's basically split in half, and I didn't know that going in, so I had to make a choice of which one would be the backup story to be covered on 5th Weeks, and that would be The Unknown Soldier. And All-Star Western, we have a 3-part story focusing on the origins of Nighthawk and Cinnamon, the characters who made appearances during those 3 issues, 7, 8, and 9 of All-Star Western. So, let's not waste any more time jumping right into what I believe to be the main event, Shazam. Shazam! Written by Geoff Johns, art by Gary Frank. This is the backup story to issues 7 through 9 of Justice League. This is like a 15-part story that is at some point going to involve actual non-backup story parts and a whole bunch of other stuff. So just kind of like keep track of this somehow. Anyway, if you have seen the Shazam movie, this is going to sound very familiar because it's basically lifted one for one. However, going up to chapter 3 here, we have it opening on a random day, random street. A guy is walking down, all happy. He's flipping a coin over to a homeless person, opening a door for somebody into their building, pushes a button on an elevator, and as the elevator is moving, there's this weird electrical surge. All the lights go out, and when it comes back up, everyone else is gone, and he is on a different-looking elevator, and it starts falling and falling until finally it opens up, and he steps out into this incredible throne room place, and he makes his way through, and he sees all these thrones have been cracked and crumbled, until finally he comes to one where a man is sitting in it. And he can't remember exactly what he said, but he said something about being worthy, and there was lightning and smoke, and he asked a whole bunch of questions until finally he was kicked out with the guy saying, "No, not you." And suddenly he was just back in the elevator where he began. And we see that this is just one account of many, approximately 37, of people saying the exact same thing. And the only thing that they have in common is that they were pulled from somewhere. A man was there, he asked some questions, and the only word they can remember him saying is Shazam. And the guy watching all this is a bald scientist type. His name is Dr. Savannah, and he's talking to one of his like flunkies, second in commands, and just recounting the story of all these people are saying the same thing, and it's all very reminiscent of this old legend of myth about a guy named Black Adam, who he was a slave. One day he walked through a door and found himself in this magical court, and he was made the champion of this court in order to protect them. But he went back and saved his country of Kondak, and then was immediately just disappeared. He just vanished. And this guy's like, this story has to be more than just a story. There's some truth to it. These people are experiencing it. So, and also Sivana is very, very much in the mindset of magic definitely exists, 100%, and I'm going to find it. So then we cut over to Philadelphia 7 months later, and we're inside of an orphanage where a Billy Batson is being talked to by a kindly couple, and Billy's just this 15-year-old kid, and he's like, it's Christmas time outside, and he's like, oh man, sure does smell like hot chocolate out there. Gee whiz, I sure do love Christmas time. And the parents are like, well, what do you like, Billy? What other things do you like? He's like, oh, shucks, I like to read, and I like to fix things. I like to help people. I guess I'm just like any other kid like that. And the parents are like, talking to the social worker, like, I mean, I think we're good to foster him, like, today. He seems like a perfect little kid. And she's like, yeah, he's great. So I will get the paperwork all set up. And he's like, wait, you want to take me home? Well, I thought they didn't like older kids. I thought I'd be stuck here. And it's like, well, we're going to get you home now, Billy. And so they all leave, and they're waving bye. And it's like, bye, bye. And Billy's like, bye, you idiots. And apparently Billy's a dick. Billy is just a total dick. The social worker is like, I'm glad you kept up the facade for that long, but, like, you are a total prick, Billy. And Billy's like, yeah, look, we have a deal. I'll stay out of your hair. You stay out of my hair. I'll play nice with this family. But, like, as soon as I hit 18, I'm out of there. So they show later on Billy being brought to the house, and we see a whole bunch of other kids looking on, just like, oh, is that him? Is that him? And some of them are excited he's there. Some of them are like, whatever. But they arrive at the house, and Billy is once again just being a total dick to this social worker, saying like, yeah, I'm 15. I know I'm under your charge until I'm 18, and I don't think I could put up with 3 more years of nagging. And as they are, like, insulting each other, the door opens up, and the parents are standing there, and they're like, hi, here's Billy. And he's like, you have an absolutely beautiful home, Mr. and Mrs. Vasquez. So they make their way inside, and the parents are like, oh, we'll get you settled in and get you introduced. And he's like, introduced to who? And we see all the other kids who were there. They'll get their intros in a second. But they, take off his jacket and pretty much get all up on him and, like, really in his space, which he is not about, to the point where he's been here for maybe, like, 10 seconds. And they're like, who wants hot chocolate? And he's just like, oh, God, what have I done? So then we get the introductions. The oldest is Mary. She's been living here for a while. She's got a rabbit named Hoppy. We get Freddie. He has crutches. He's also, like, pretty much a con man. We got Pedro, strong, silent. We have Eugene, who's the smart kid. And then we have Darla, who's a bubbly little kid who just jumps all over Billy and is so happy to have him around. And at this point, they're like, okay, well, kids, why don't you take Billy up, show him his room, and you can lay down the house rules. And Billy's like, oh, dear God, there are house rules. And Mary lays him out. Basically, just a whole bunch of little tiny things. And then the big one is that we always have each other's back no matter what. That's the family rule. And immediately Billy's like, the family rule? Let's get one thing straight here. I'm not your family. I'm not your brother. You leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. That's how this is going to go. And at that point, Darla is extremely upset because she's just, she just wanted to have a new brother. She was so happy to have him there. But she goes off crying. Mary basically throws Billy into his room, just being like, dude, none of us have it good here. We all have our own problems, but this is like the best place you're going to have, and you don't have to be a total dick all the time. And he's like, all right, whatever, bye. So she leaves, and he just pouts for a little bit. He pulls out some books from his knapsack, and also a picture of supposedly of his parents sitting in front of a tiger exhibit at some zoo, probably the Philadelphia one. And as he sets the pictures back in his bag, tucks under his bed, he's like, I didn't mean to make her cry. But he looks out the window and sees this face in the clouds, and he's like, that's weird. Anyway, cut to next morning. Billy wakes up to Darla like right in his face, and she's like, "Up, he's awake. We can finally have breakfast." So he's like, "You're not mad at me?" And she's like, "Nah, Darla's not mad at anybody, like ever. She probably has something wrong with her short-term memory, honestly." But they make their way down for breakfast, and then they have to go to school. And Freddie is pretty much the same age as Billy, so they stick together for the day, despite Billy not wanting to. He doesn't want to be family or friends with Freddie. But we see that Freddie, like, he gets test scores and hall passes and doctor's notes, and he sells them to the other kids. And one kid comes up saying how he wants his money back because despite him being a very large male, he was given a doctor's note for a diagnosis of endometriosis, which is not a diagnosis you could have. So then we cut to after school, everyone's leaving, and Billy's like, "Yeah, don't wait up for me, I got stuff to do." And he walks away from the family. But as they are, the family is accosted by this other family of the Breyer brothers, who are all just these rich, snobby kids who are just, they just don't like the Vasquez family, I guess you call them, but like that group of kids. And Freddie makes a snarky joke to which one of the Breyers immediately starts fighting him and like pins down some of the other kids as well. To which Billy immediately turns tail, comes back, and beats up all the Breyers, no problem. And he's like, "Yeah, don't thank me for it. I really just don't like bullies." But as he does so, he sees the principal is like there and caught them. So he's brought back into the principal's office along with the Vasquez, or at least Mr. Vasquez. And he's like, "Look, I don't know what kind of kid you think Billy is, but we got his transcripts from other schools. He is like literally a dick all the time. So he needs to control himself or else he may not, like, we will kick him out of the school." And at that point, the Breyer brother's father, Mr. Breyer, shows up and he's like, "Who's this young boy picking fights with my son?" And he's like, "I didn't pick the fight. You guys started the fight." But regardless, he donates and he's rich enough that the principal immediately sides with him, and Billy's threatened with expulsion if he does anything else over again. So Mr. Vasquez tells him, like, "Hey, look, you got to know, like, even if they started the fight, you shouldn't get in the fights. Just don't do that." And Billy's like, "Yeah, sometimes you have to." And he walks up to Mr. Breyer and says, like, "Hey, if your boys don't back off, I'm going to shove their silver spoons down their throats." And Bryson immediately just grabs the back of Billy's collar and it's just like, "Oh, yeah? Yeah? Well, if you do anything to my sons again, I'm going to make sure that you have to deal with me." And then Vasquez comes up and stands up for Billy because that's not cool to threaten a kid. But he pushes Billy onto Vasquez, peels out in the cars, they all laugh. And Billy, he doesn't like that he had to have someone else stand up for him. But you can tell that he's a little bit gracious that someone has his back. And then finally we have 45 miles north of Baghdad, after 7 months of searching, Savannah's there and he's told by one of his guys at a dig site, like, "We found something, finally at last." And they found a door that has some symbols in it that Savannah had never seen before. And this he believes has to be the tomb of Black Adam. This is it. And it's going to be enough to save his family. Because that was something I forgot to mention, was that his family has some illness or something, or maybe they're dead. I'm not sure. Regardless, only magic can save them. So he sees them trying to pry open the door. They're not doing it fast enough. He grabs the crowbar and like pries it open even harder. And when he does, there's an electrical magic force that zaps out of the door and shocks Dr. Savannah in his eye. And everyone's like, "Dr. Savannah, are you okay? Are you okay?" And he sits up and he's like, I can see magic. And you see his eye has this lightning bolt scar, and it's like the cosmos inside of it, and he can just see all around him little sparks of magic. And that is the end of chapters 1 through 3. Like I said, if you've seen the Shazam movie, it is basically beat for beat up to this point. It's very good, very solid. The art, I mean, it's Gary Frank on art. If you've never seen him draw, you should. It is fantastic the whole way through. Every single panel just feels so well crafted, so detailed. It's solid. There's a reason that, yes, it's because it's so long, but there's a reason that Shazam got a trade by itself, because it is a fully fledged story. It takes its time. It's setting up the characters, and it's doing a lot with it. So I can't fault these first 3 chapters at all. It tells a very good story. I like how it sets up that thing of Billy being just this super neat and keen kid, and then he's just a dick, like the whole way through. And I like that turn because I genuinely don't think that anyone would have been expecting it. So yeah, no, overall, I'm giving this a... I want to say 9. I want to say 9. That seems a little bit high, but honestly, it's halfway because I know what's coming. I'm not going to bury the lead there. I do know what's coming in this book, and I know that it's worth it. But at the same point, just in these 3 chapters, you feel this sense that, like, this is the definitive origin for this character. Like, it's not a thing of they're going to, flip-flop back and forth of what happened. This is them setting this in stone of this is what you need to get into Shazam. And I think it's solid. I think it's a good start. So we'll pick up the next 3 chapters the next time that we have a week 5. Fall of the House of Wayne Part 1. This is from Batman number 9, written by Scott Snyder and James Tynion IV, art by Rafael Albuquerque. So this is, I think, a 3-part story, but only part 1 is in issue number 9. We'll get to the next parts later on. But the gist of this is that is a story from about 20 years ago, and it's from the perspective of Jarvis Pennyworth, Alfred's father, who's basically writing a letter to Alfred saying, hey, I know that you really were looking forward to coming here and being a butler in my stead, but don't do it. And here's the reasons why. So he's writing this letter and he's looking very, very scared. He's heading out in the rain, and everywhere he looks, he feels like he sees this figure standing over him. And as he's making his way out the door, he looks back at the manor and he doesn't see anything. But then we see that there is this figure with a knife that's looking at him out the window as he gets in his car. And he's like, I see you, and I will get you, Jarvis Pennyworth. So Jarvis drives his car out to the gate of Wayne Manor. He has to flip the switch in order to get the gates to open. So he gets out of his car, flips the switch, runs back to his car, and we interrupt that with a flashback, within this flashback, to him just serving the Wayne family, little Bruce and Thomas and Martha. And he's having fun playing with Bruce, and he's like, oh, I hope to make this place great for you for when you finally came and took your turn as their butler. But this terrible thing has happened. And we see that it all started when Martha was reading the newspaper and saw that the mayor of the city was basically just being super corrupt. And he was shutting down 5 different schools because they just couldn't pay him the bribe money in order to keep them afloat. And Thompson's like, well, dear, we'll give him a stern talking to when it comes time for fundraising. She's like, no, we need to do more than that. There's something, we got to step out and actually do something. And so she turns to Jarvis and she's like, Jarvis, how about we take a little venture out of the manor? And he's like, oh, yes, that sounds fantastic. And then his narration's like, that was awful. That was where everything started going wrong. And I don't want to blame Martha because it's not Martha's fault. In actuality, Alfred, it's mine. It's my fault. And we see that he's driving his way out through the gates again. But before he can make it out, they're slammed shut. And he looks back and sees that the lever has been put back into the closed position. And he's like, what? But how? And then he looks up on top of a building and he sees a Talon standing over him. And he just says, oh, it was me, Alfred. I have doomed us all. And that's where we leave off. That's part 1. So not a whole lot going into it, but a hell of a lot of intrigue. Art is great. It's got it's a different feel, especially to Greg Capullo's stuff and the rest of the book. But I don't know, it feels like it somehow fits. It's got this weird thing of the flashback within the flashback is very warm, very oh, things are good. And then everything else is very cold and rainy and whatnot. Color's fantastic. I managed to follow the art the whole way through, so it's fine. I mean, it's hard to really rate it on whether or not it's a good written story because it is just one part of 3 of what feels like one story. So if I really had to give it a rating, I guess I would put it at maybe I give it a 7. But again, that's I have just such a small level of reference here on whether or not it's great that it's hard to really place. But it is at least a solid opening to the rest of the story, and we will see the rest the next time that we have the ability to cover this fifth week. Welcome to the Dark Side and 50/50, written by Tony S. Daniel, art by Szymon Kudranski. These are backup stories from Detective Comics number 8 and 9, and they are about Two-Face. It is actually, I believe, a 3-part story, but part 3 I haven't gotten to yet. So parts 1 and 2 are what we'll be covering today. So we open up on Gotham's East End, raining, and we just see this figure stumbling through the streets, apparently having been shot and saying how they are a dead man. And they go and they knock on a door. Whoever's behind the door asks for a password, and he stumbles through a few words before he's like, just shut up and open the door, Vinny. And when he opens the door, we see that the figure was Two-Face, and he is bleeding out proficiently from his chest, and they go and they get a surgeon in order to fix the stuff. And we see him lying on the surgeon's table, pulling out whatever bullets inside, and they're saying like, "Oh, I will. You can clean up the wound, but I will tend to the most corrupt part, his mind." And then the bulk of the story. So 13 days ago, we see him talking to this random political guy, as far as I can tell, and he's spinning his coin whether or not he's gonna shoot or let this guy go free. And apparently, the backstory here is that this guy is just the messenger delivering from the prosecutor for Two-Face's crimes and whether or not they'll allow him to be a district attorney again. And he's coming up and he's saying, look, here's the deal. Prosecutor's going to drop everything and you will be allowed to be a district attorney again. That's what they said. And Two-Face is like, I don't believe that at all. I think this is all just a ruse. And I genuinely think that you are just... like, because the prosecutor is apparently some very old rival of Harvey Dent's, to the point where, like, he tried to sleep with Harvey's ex-wife. So, yeah, not so big of a fan of that guy. So, he's trying to get out answers as to what the actual plan is, because he also realizes that, you know, if this were a thing of them saying they were going to drop the charges, why wouldn't Two-Face's attorney get a call? Why wouldn't Two-Face himself get a call? Why would they send some low-level flunky to come here and deliver the news instead of doing it in person? So they're just going to go ahead, take this guy to the back room and get some real answers out of him. Best way I could put it. So they start torturing this guy, and Harvey's talking to, I think, his lawyer, basically saying like, yeah, this is like, even if he's telling the truth, this is something like we got to make sure and blah blah blah. And as they're talking, saying how he's not giving up anything despite being tortured for over 2 hours, they get a call from the district attorney's office saying like, hey, did you get our guy? Yeah, we sent him. We were telling the truth. And he's like, oh, all right, well, bandage him up, send him on his way. And the guy's like, so we're good? And he's like, yeah, the coin came up on the good side. You're fine. So then we cut to Gotham City's East End again, and he's having a meeting with Dominic Storano, who is the district attorney or the prosecutor, I should say, who is going after Dent. And, you know, he hates him. There's a lot of animosity between the two of them, but they know that there's a 50-50 shot as to whether or not Dent can get free of any of the charges put on him because of all, like, the coercion and backroom stuff he's been doing. So he's trying to come here and make some sort of a deal with Dent in order to let this all go smoothly. And they arrive. It's supposed to be just Two-Face and Storano, but Two-Face, of course, brings his goons to, like, pat him down, make sure there's no wire or anything. And Storano apparently was having an affair, and the only person who has evidence of this and is blackmailing him is some guy named Freak Show, who I guess is a big player in, like, the underside of town or something like that. So he's telling him, look, you take care of Freak Show, and I will make sure that all your charges are dropped and you can get back into the district attorney's office. If anything happens to me, then I have ways in order to make all that stuff get released, and you will never be district attorney again. So because Freak Show is making power moves on the lower side of town, Two-Face is already in on it. He's like, yeah, no, I'll totally kill this guy. It's already, like, I just didn't get around to it yet because I was doing my defense on Storano. So he heads downtown to a tavern where Freak Show himself is not, but someone who knows where he is. So he busts in, starts firing off shots, killing a couple people, and he meets up with a guy named Maurice, who I guess is the guy he's looking for. And him and Maurice go to the back room, and I'm like, all right, tell me where Freak Show is. And he's like, man, I don't know. Nobody knows where he's been hiding. And immediately Two-Face just starts unloading pain upon him. A couple of, I think it's Two-Face's goons are making their way through the facility, just keeping an eye on things. And we see one goon is just coming across all of his friends with their heads and other limbs cut off, like totally dead. And they're like, what in the hell's going on here? Cut back to Two-Face, who is still threatening Maurice. He hears gunshots out in the other room. He's like, what's going on here, Maurice? Is this a setup? And then as he steps out the door to see what's going on, he sees that last thug is dead on the ground. And as he turns back to Maurice, we see Maurice has broken through the window and has leapt out on the fire escape to escape. So he gives chase to Maurice over top of rooftops. And he's like, yeah, all right, I'm gonna go ahead. I'm going to take care of this. And I'm going to get my answer so I can get my life back. But as he lands on the rooftop where Maurice jumps to, we see that Maurice has lost his arm because it's just laying there. And a couple of ninjas are standing there saying, Harvey Dent, you have been chosen by our leader. And then they trank dart Harvey and say, all right, tell leader we have succeeded. And that's where it leaves off. Part 3 later. So here's the thing. Szymon Kudranski on the art. I really, really love this work on Penguin, Pain and Prejudice. It was very moody, very fantastic. It set the tone right. This one, I feel like it still is trying to set close to that same tone, but it has, I don't know, there's something weird about it. Maybe it's just Two-Face itself is not as visually distinct as Penguin. It doesn't provide as much like shadow and whatnot, because the whole reason that Kudranski's work worked for me was that it was very heavy in shadows. So for a lot of these panels, Two-Face just looks like a guy, because his face is almost completely in shadows. He's just a dude. So, and I know that's probably a purposeful choice to only show like part of Two-Face at any time, but it's just, I don't know. It just strikes me as more of a generic gangster story than it does a, hey, here's Two-Face and his... And that's the other thing, is that Two-Face doesn't really do anything in this that's, like, Two-Facey. He's not... He flipped the coin the one time in the beginning, but then even when he didn't do anything about it. Like, he just kept torturing the guy until the actual info came through. So, I don't know. It just doesn't strike me as much of an actual Two-Face story. But then again, I don't know what a Two-Face story really would be, except for gimmicky. So, overall, I would go ahead and give these two parts collectively I'll give it a 7, and a lot of that is the art, because whether or not I think that it's really working for Two-Face as a whole, it is still fantastic art. Writing-wise, it's fine, but it does just feel like a generic, like, back alley gangster deal. It doesn't feel like a superhero story, if that makes any sense. So, 7 for this, and we'll check out part 3 when we get to it. Meanwhile, written by Sholly, Fisch, and art by Brad Walker, this is a backup story to Action Comics number 7. We're dealing with Steel and what he was doing when Superman went off into space to fight Brainiac. So that's pretty much all it is. So we open up and say how New Troy was the heart of Metropolis and super cool place right until it was abducted by Brainiac like an hour ago. And now everything's kind of going to hell because, you know, power lines aren't hooked up, water breakage, there's a whole bunch of just crime of people who are taking advantage of the chaos. So someone needs to step up and be Superman while Superman isn't here. So we see Steel, aka John Irons, I believe, John Henry Irons, and he's holding up a suspension bridge that basically was collapsed because it led to New Troy, which I guess is an island in between two rivers. And so cops calling down to him saying like, hey, everyone's off the bridge, you can let it go. And he's like, cool, will do, go ahead, I'll give you 30 seconds. But then like 2 seconds later, the bridge starts collapsing and Steel makes the comment of, because he's basically just Iron Manning it. He's just using his rocket boots to hold it up. And he's like, oh boy, next version of this costume's getting a helmet. So then he flies over to the bridge and he makes sure everyone's all right. And he hears someone offhandedly say like, oh, my family. And he's like, oh, crap, my family. Hey, does anyone have a cell phone I can borrow? And he gets someone's cell phone and calls his niece, Natasha. And apparently everyone's been looking for him. And they're like, oh, what's going on? We've been looking at this. Yeah, sorry. I've just been a little held up here. I'm helping out some people. And he's like, helping people? Yeah, so tell everyone I'm okay and I'll talk to you later. And he throws the cell phone back to the guy who lent it to him. And then we see that there's a ferry that, because of the fact that the giant island just got removed, all the water currents of the rivers are changing. And as such, the ferry's about to go off of this waterfall. So he quickly uses some physics in his head to figure out where he needs to apply force to basically push the ferry horizontally so that it can get to shore. And he's like, yeah, physics, hooray. He actually says, like, who says you don't need physics in the real world? So then we just see a quick bunch of shots of him, like, he's stopping a car because the traffic lights aren't working. He's putting out a fire because all the water mains are broken. He's stopping some basic crime. And he's like, man, this feels like too much for any one person. I wonder if this is how Superman feels every day. But then he looks around and he sees that despite all of the horrible things happening, there are just as many people who are responding positively. Like, there's the emergency response people, there's ambulances going around, and he's helping out with them as best he can. There's people handing out food and water to people who need them. And he's like, you know what? I thought it would take a hero to bring Metropolis through this disaster. I was wrong. It doesn't take one hero. It takes millions of them. And so he's proud in the city. And that's where we leave off, is that he's just proud to be Metropolisian, or whatever the term is. So, it's solid story. It's a nice little look at, like, okay, Superman literally just went off planet for, like, a few hours. How do we deal? Because he had to go off planet during the middle of a crisis. So how does this guy step up to fill the shoes? And I think it did a fantastic job of showing that. Brad Walker's art, I got to say, pretty fantastic throughout. I'm not sure. Let me see. J. David Ramos with David Curiel did the colors. I really do like some of the little coloring, like, flourishes they have here, particularly where there's, like, light. They make sure that it gives, like, a bloom effect. So, no, fantastic the whole way through. My only qualm is that it is just such a short little simple story of, like, he does some work and then he sees people doing good things and he's happy. And it doesn't even feel like it has an ending. It's just a thing of being like, oh, people are good. Da-da-da. So I'm going to go ahead and give this I'll give it a 7. But it is, if this were somehow to be stretched out into like 2 or 3 issues, or even just enough to fill one whole issue, I think it would be a very high quality issue. I think it would be one of those things that you could just separate out and read just on its own, and it would be a solid enough read. But because it's so small, just a 7 for now. Executive Power, written by Sholly, Fisch, art by Cully, Hamner. This is the backup story to Action Comics number 9, aka the one with Earth 23 Superman, and this is just continuing on with another one of his stories. So we open up at what I can only assume is the White House, or, oh no, it is the White House, just a different angle than I'm used to seeing. And there's just a whole room of people all talking, saying like, okay, Karak. It's a country over somewhere in the Middle East, and they apparently are working on a nuclear program. And if they get nuclear powers, they're also like, number one export is terrorism, so we got to stop them. And so they just basically talking through what are they supposed to do, how soon do they have to get involved and stop this. And the president, a.k.a. Calvin Ellis, a.k.a. Superman, is apparently talking to the Karaki president right now, and everyone's like, well, what is he going to be able to do? That guy's absolutely crazy. And he's like, don't forget, Calvin Ellis has brought us through many a crisis. He's done wonderful things. Let's see what he's able to do. So then we see the call connecting, and on one side is Calvin Ellis, or at least his secretary, making the call saying like, oh, by the way, the president's on the phone. And then on the other side, we have President for Life Harriet of Karak, who's also hopping on the phone. And conversation starts. And he's like, oh, Mr. Ellis, what could what can I do for you? And he's like, all right, here's the deal. So I just want to talk to you about two things. First, I want to talk about the nuclear program. And Harriet's like, what nuclear program? I don't know. You came to my country and you saw that I didn't have nothing. And they're like, yeah, we know that you gave us the tour of all the places you torn down and then just are doing work in the other place. But here's the thing. I didn't call to ask whether or not this stuff existed. I wanted to tell you how they're doing. First, I want to do this exactly because I really like the way they do it. And apparently they're underground firestorm labs. So these are this universe version of firestorms. Two of them have apparently caved in a few minutes ago. One of them is flooded with molten lava. One of them suffered an accident that will leave it radioactive for the next 200 years. And the last one is made inactive, but remains so that evidence can be shown to the international community. And throughout the point where he's revealing this, you see that his little general on standby is getting calls that confirm that all of this stuff has happened. And then you see that the whole way that it happened is that Superman and the Wonder Woman of Earth 23, aka Nubia, they're just going through and beating up everybody and like causing all this stuff. And so Harriet's like, this is an outrage. This is an act of war. And he's like, no, see, it would be an act of war if you admitted to having them, but these things don't exist according to you. So can't be an act of war then. But here's the thing. I wanted to tell you that I'm going to make sure that all of our allies put sanctions on you. You're not going to have any water sources from Atlantis. You're going to have natural disasters from Markovia, and you're going to have an Amazon army from Themyscira. Literally everything's about to go wrong for you. Unless, here's the second thing I wanted to talk about. You join me on the Alliance of Nations, and we'll just demilitarize, and you can be part of the club. And he tells him, like, totally optional. I will be doing that other stuff if you don't, but totally optional. Choice is yours. Thank you for your time. And Wonder Woman's standing there like, why'd you do that? Why did you extend that olive branch? He's like, I've had to. I mean, I had to give him the choice to be better. And he's like, you do? Look, Cal, here's the thing. You are the president. And also Superman. And when you were growing up, like, you were just Superman, and those things that you did mattered more than what you did as a person. But right now, the things you do as a president sometimes matter more than the things you do as Superman. Like, they affect more lives. I know that you think you need to extend this, like, olive branch of him being able to prove himself based off your Superman values, but, like, sometimes as president, you can't do that. And he's like, well, I've got a responsibility for the greater good. And then Wonder Woman just points out, like, look, what if one day you do something for the greater good, but the world sees it differently? And I wish I could say we get an answer to that, but that's literally where it ends. It says end question mark, but there's nothing more to that. I like this concept. I think it was a very, like, this is a man of action. This is a dude who's going through, this is not a Superman that just, like, does stuff like and lets other things go through. He only stops the immediate threats. This is a guy who's proactive, and I love it. I really do. But there's no answer here. This is just like a general character sort of question. This isn't a thing of we're telling a story, and I'm really disappointed by that. Cully Hamner's art is fine. It fits the tone they're going for well enough. It's a bit of a shock compared to how the art is otherwise done in the same issue of Action Comics 9. Just a hell of a lot different looking, but it's fine. It's still fine art. No, the main problem I have with this is the fact that it felt like I'm missing 2 pages. It felt like there's Wonder Woman asks this question, Superman's looking at her, and then end. And I'm like, okay, I guess we're done then. So, I mean, how much does the fact that it doesn't have a good ending really bring it down in my mind? I gotta say, not a whole lot, but it is a problem. So I'm gonna go ahead and give this one a 7.5. Art, like I said, fine, even good, not fantastic, and a bit of a shock otherwise, but I just really wanted to see this actually resolve in something, because it's, at this point, it feels like the next page should just be Superman justifying himself, and like doing it well, because he's literally president and Superman. He should be able to justify his point, but instead, we leave it at Wonder Woman, like, posing a question, and Superman seemingly, by the way they framed it, unable to answer. And I'm like, no, he should have that. He should have that answer. So, yeah, no, 7.5, somewhere in there. But I just wanted an answer. Nighthawk and Cinnamon, written by Justin Gray and Jimmy Palmiotti, art by Patrick Scherberger. This is the backup story over 3 parts of All-Star Westerns, issues 7, 8, and 9, and it is basically just, hey, Nighthawk and Cinnamon were recurring characters in those issues. Who are they? How did they get here? So we open up with a old rundown gold town that I guess is filled with a bunch of unsavory types. And Nighthawk and Cinnamon are surrounded by them, saying like, boy, how did we get into this mess? And this issue is narrated by Nighthawk. And they start getting in a fight, and he's like, this is a whole lot different than where I grew up as a boy. I grew up in a salty sea town, and the cries of gulls are now replaced by sorrowful wails of coyotes. So anyway, we get his backstory. And apparently it was out on a boat, out on a whaling ship, where he was raised by a man named Captain Monbel, an African captain of this ship who went out whaling. And at this point, they already had oil coming out of like Texas or whatever. So this was a dying breed, but they still were doing so. And I'm not sure what Nighthawk's name actually is. I think it's Hannibal. So Hannibal was brought out onto the little, I don't know what they're called, dinghies, little ships that are sent out from the main ship in order to go hunt down the whale. And Captain Monbel basically was his father, his adoptive father, who taught him everything he needed to know. And he's making sure that Hannibal gets a good education, that he's well learned, and that he knows right from wrong, a good morality as well. So he tells him about a story of how he was brought over here as a slave from Africa, but he got his freedom, and now he's captain of this ship and this own company. And we see in the background is the flag that I guess they use for the ship, and it is the Nighthawk symbol. So he's having them read like Darwin's Evolution of Species, and they get into a debate on like, what is God? Is it like real? Is it a feeling? Is it something that can't be explained? What is it truly? But they have a little intellectual conversation about that before finally they say, all right, get a good night's sleep because tonight we're sailing back home. So we see them going home, and Hannibal explains that they always would go out to this bar, and he would divvy up all the earnings for whatever they got amongst the crewmates. However, this particular night, Hannibal was sent down by the captain's wife in order to get him to go home to tell him the good news. And as he arrives down at the bar, he sees that the captain has been attacked by his own crew who got greedy and wanted a larger share. And Hannibal yells, tells him to stop, and he goes and cradles a dying captain. The captain tells him, like, be a good kid, always do the right thing, stuff like that, and take care of my family. So the good news that he was sent down to say was that the captain's wife was pregnant and they had a baby on the way. And he didn't tell the captain before he died because he didn't know whether or not that would be, a peaceful thing to tell him or, heartbreaking. So he didn't tell him, and he always regrets that. But regardless, he takes care of the captain's family. And, about 10 years later, he's an adult, and he's like, all right, I have to go on my own way now. You have your son to take care of you, and everything will be all right. And the captain's wife gives a very heartfelt goodbye and gives him the flag, the Nighthawk flag, that was on the captain's ship. And as he goes away, he says, I know I was destined for more. So we cut back to current day, where Nighthawk's strung up by a chain from one of the people in the group, and they say, oh, you should have never gone up against Bob Robertson's gang. And they knock out Nighthawk and Cinnamon, and they're taking him down to the old mine, where they're going to throw them out in deep and then dynamite up the entrance so that they can't get out, and they will starve in there. That's part 1. Part 2 is Cinnamon's side of things, where they're walking their way down the mines, and Cinnamon explains, like, I wasn't always in this sort of situation. And they open up each chapter with strange where life takes you. So we see Cinnamon as a kid. Her father was a sheriff in town and was killed by some outlaws who were robbing a bank. I think it was actually Bob Robertson who did it. So, yeah, she came back here for revenge. Regardless, because her mother died when she was very young, her father was all she had left. With him dead, she was put into an orphanage where the other kids were just ridiculously cruel to her and like beat her up and called her names. They apparently were the ones who started calling her Cinnamon, which she hated. But regardless, she got into fights with them and she learned to fight dirty. So she used like a broom handle to just knock them all out. And the nun who was in charge of this orphanage saw how much chaos she caused. And she's like, okay, that's it. We're putting you in like special wing. And, you know, she was always looking to escape. And one night she did. She took a horse and as much food as she could stick in her pockets. But of course, that didn't last long. And as she wandered through the desert, she nearly died. But she met a man named Ichi, who basically was a samurai and was the master splinter to her TMNT, and basically taught her the basics of how to survive out in the wild. Also taught her sword fighting, throwing stars and whatnot. And we see her landing them into a cactus. And he always would speak in like fortune cookie. He would always be like, we do not rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training. And she's like, I don't know what that means, but cool. And she, over time, you know, she grew to love him, be like a father figure sort of thing. Until finally one night, after 3 years of training, she woke up one day and he was gone, as if he was never even there to begin with. So cut to current day. They're still walking down the mine. They come across a fork in the mine, and Cinnamon says, like, hold on, do you feel that? And she uses her tracking abilities to feel like a difference in air pressure. And as she goes through, she has Nighthawk dig through one of the walls. They come out to this ancient, like, Mayan or Incan, like, tomb site where the two people who are buried there are wearing these gold necklaces. And they look at him and be like, huh, you know, there was a guy on my ship who, like, believed that these Mayan warriors could heal faster and be stronger than anyone before. And so they put on the necklaces, and Cinnamon's like, what if these things are cursed? And he's like, I thought you didn't believe in magic. And so they end up managing to literally punch their way, like, through the earth wearing these things. And they recognize, like, maybe these things do have something, because I don't even feel tired, like, at all. So they keep them around their necks for the time being. But then they look out south of the desert, and they see that the Bob Robertson gang is making their way south down towards New Orleans. And yeah, so then we cut over to part 3, where they're already in New Orleans and they're having a shootout in a graveyard, and they're fighting some of the gang, and we see that the graveyard has been flooded, and there are literally gators just going through the water here, eating some of the gang members. Finally, Cinnamon ropes up one of the gang members and dangles him above the gators until he gets the information of where the person who killed her father is staying, which is somewhere in New Orleans. So they get the information, and he's actually, because he's such a big public figure, he's actually in the middle of a float of the parade. So they're just standing over watching the parade. They'd be like, we'll just wait until one of his gang members manages to relay the information that we survived, and then we'll make our move. So they have a quick romantic moment on top of the roof. Robertson gets his information that Nighthawk and Cinnamon survived. So they understand that what he's going to do is get all of his guys together and bring them back to his house before he goes back there, because he thinks they're going to be ambushing him at his house. But of course they weren't, and they just rigged his house to explode before anybody even got in there. So they exploded out, and everyone's like, screw this, I'm out. So the only one left is Robertson, to which Nighthawk and Cinnamon step up. And Cinnamon is literally about to kill him, because he keeps on, like, taking credit for Cinnamon's existence. He's like, look at you. If I didn't kill your father, you'd just be an ordinary housewife. I made you what you are today. And Cinnamon's like, shut up. And she's about to kill him, but then Nighthawk's like, don't do it. Trust in the legal system. We can do this. So they say how they've been collecting evidence on him. They're going to put him up to trial, and he's going to rot in jail for the rest of his life. But then as Nighthawk's saying this, Robertson pulls a gun on him, to which Cinnamon pulls off her father's sheriff's star, throws it into the throat of Robertson, killing him. And Nighthawk's like, why'd you do that? You know I could have dealt with the gun. And she's like, what? He was self-defense. Like, don't look at me. Regardless, it's done. And he's like, fine, whatever. What do you want to do now that your years of revenge are finally finished? She's like, I don't know. You want to stay here in New Orleans until Jonah Hex gets here? Not actually saying that, but more or less what it means. And it's like, yeah, sure. And what should we do in our off hours? And she's like, oh, I'll let you figure that out for yourself, wink. And that's where it ends. I think it's a solid, like, I feel like I would have been better off reading this as I was reading the All-Star Western issues instead of saving them for afterwards, because it did feel like these characters didn't get a lot of time to shine in the issues themselves. But within this backup story, I think it does a very good job of saying, okay, here's who they are, here's where they got their necklace, da-da-da-da-da. It's just breaking down the basics of their characters, and I appreciate that. It would have done better if I read it as intended. However, as for this story itself, perfectly fine. It's well told. It gets through the origins of both characters and sets up their own little story of how they got to where they are now. It does it all interestingly. I don't know if these were pre-existing characters, if they were created for this, but they seem more pulpy. They seem more 50s era, so I'm sure that that's probably where they came from. Overall, though, I'm going to give the collection of all three of these I'll give it a 7. And my only real drawback, the only thing that's keeping it from like a higher number, is the fact that I think the most interesting part of it is probably like these necklaces and what it allows them to do, but they gloss over that so quickly of just saying, it does whatever we need, we're not tired, anyway, moving on. And like the entire end of the issue just doesn't involve them at all. So that's the only part that I'm a little bit hung up on, is that what seemed to be the most interesting part of them having these magic amulets is just whatever. But overall, 7 for this, and maybe we'll see Nighthawk and Cinnamon in further places in All-Star Western. Survival Mode, written by J.T. Krul, art by Scott Kolins. This is the backup story for Men of War number 7, and it is possibly the least superhero story to have been written in this book. So we open up in Iraq, where a helicopter's just doing a patrol of the area, American military, and we see 2 guys inside named Fisch and Coop, or at least those are the names they call each other, and they're just talking, saying like, another day, another dollar, haha. And this guy's talking about his ex-wife and how she's the one getting all the money, and just talking to each other and having some fun. And then at one point, Fisch is like, don't worry, Coop, I got your back. And then their helicopter is hit by an RPG, and it starts spinning out, crashes into the ground. And all but 3 of them are left alive, or are killed. So all that's left is Fisch, Coop, and Gonzalez, which I can... No points if you figure out what happens with Gonzalez here. But we see that whoever shot them down is arriving in a little Humvee and is coming after them to kill the rest of them. So fire is unleashed. But then we cut to the future, or I guess now, and the rest of it's a flashback, of Fisch. He's walking out onto a football stadium, and everyone's like, please welcome Derek Fishman, returning home from his tour abroad. And the entire football stadium is like, yeah, USA, USA. And Derek's like, wow, I really don't like being in a crowd of this many people completely unarmed. But, I'm back home, so that's got to count for something. There's fireworks going off, and everything's awesome. Cut back to the past. Their terrorists are shooting at them, and everyone's like, they're taking cover behind the rocks, and they're like, Gonzalez, you okay? And Gonzalez is like, no, and he dies. And so they're like, all right, Gonzalez is out, and they keep on unloading fire. Cut to a party that I guess is in Fisch's honor, and there are 2 kids who are playing some video games that use like what look to be like, they're orange, but they're full like rifles. And I don't know what video game this is, but they're playing each other. And one's like, hey, what do you say, bro? Talking to Fisch. What do you say, bro? You gonna show us how it's done? And he's like, maybe later. And everyone's just talking and gossiping about like absolutely pointless, useless things. Just like, I can't believe she unfriended me on Facebook. And then whenever they see Fisch, they just give him like a thumbs up and a smile. And he's like, oh, this doesn't feel right at all. So then cut back to them being in cover. And they're like, okay, they're advancing on us. We need to do something now to be able to get out of here. So they each take a grenade, they unpin it, and they throw it out in the general direction of the terrorists to just give some cover, disorient them, and run for their lives. But as they get out of cover to do so, Coop ends up being shot in the shoulder. He's still good to walk, though, so they make their way. Then we cut back to Fisch. It's actually been some time now. and he's apparently been going to a bunch of interviews. He's gotten dressed up to go to them, and he just feels completely useless because his disability ran out, and he's just sitting there doing nothing. He's unable to get a job, and his parents are like, "Hey, don't worry about it. It's fine. We are fine. You have done enough. You have done plenty." But he still wants to be able to do more. So then we see that he has an interview at the local T-Mart, and the guy for the interview comes in, sits down, and it's between Derek and then just totally just dude bro, like Randy Evans is his name, and he's just chilling out. And the guy's like, "Hey, look, sorry, we don't usually do interviews this way, but I am completely swamped, so I'm just going to do like a joint interview with the two of you here. So, hey, Fishman, you served in the Army. Thank you for your service." And he's like, "Yeah, I'm sure you've had your share of stressful situations, Band of Brothers, Semper Fi, all that." He's like, "Yeah, totally." "Randy, it says here you graduated from this university." He's like, "Yep, I played football." He's like, "Wait a minute, you're the Randy Evans from Fulton State?" He's like, "Yeah, totally. You watched?" He's like, "Oh man, that play you did back then." And him and the interviewing manager and Randy just start like back and forthing about just high school and college football and just going on. And he's like, "Yeah, I could pull up my play on YouTube and do that." And then you see Derek just slowly just close his eyes out of frustration and anger and disappointment because he knows he's not going to get the job, despite it being such a crap job anyway. And he's just upset about that. Cut back to the past one more time, and we see Cooper and Fisch making their way over a ridge. He's trying to look at Cooper's wounds, and before he can get the chance, they stumble across two more insurgents that shoot Coop multiple times. There's no way he's surviving it. Luckily, Cooper was in front of Fisch, so he's able to pull out his gun and shoot the two insurgents. But at that point, Cooper's gone. And as we cut back to present day, we see him standing in a military graveyard next to Cooper's grave, and he's telling him, like, nobody, and he's just recounting basically the point of the story, is that everyone says they're there for you. Everyone says, great job, we're so proud of what you did, but all you want to do is be able to talk to someone, to be able to share that feeling of closeness with someone, but nobody can hear, like nobody can understand. Nobody can truly relate unless they were there. And so he feels more and more isolated, more and more alone, because nobody wants to hear these grisly war stories, these horrible things that just end in tragedy. So he's reminiscing over Coop's grave, and as he turns around, a man's standing there like, "Oh, hey, didn't mean to bother you. Just came here for a few of my own. Did you just get back home?" And he's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, I've been back from tour for a while, here for a few of my friends. I'm an old Vietnam vet. Say, I've been looking for someone to talk to. You want to go have a drink?" And they walk away from the graveyard, sharing names. His name's PJ. The other guy's Fisch, obviously. And they shake hands and go have a drink. And that's it. I think it's a touching story. I think it honestly is just a really great, like, it has nothing to do with anything like super heroics or like anything like that, but it's just in terms of just a one quick, like, hey, here's an actual problem. Here's a thing that people deal with. It's a great little just insight into that. It doesn't even, like, I narrated out the things of nobody can talk and stuff like that, but that was just my own words. They make it a whole lot more, like, poignant within the issue itself. It's not as just spelled out as like that. No, it's a fantastic issue in that regard. Art-wise, gonna go ahead and say pretty standard. Nothing really stood out as fantastic. I will say the changes from the flashback to the current day stuff are very different, to the point where I'm surprised they are the same artist, Scott Kolins, so he's got a good range there. But none of them really popping out as this incredible style. So yeah, no, overall, I'm going to go ahead and give this one I'll give it a 7. I think it's decently well enough done. I don't think there's really much you really could have expanded on. I think having it be a backup story is probably within the best placement of it. It's not a huge story to tell, but it is a good story to tell. So 7 for this, and that is officially the end of the Men of War saga. The Unknown Soldier, Chapter 1, written by Justin Gray and Jimmy Palmiotti, art by Dan Panosian. This is not technically the backup, but just the second part of GI Combat #1, because it's an anthology book, and I was unaware of that going into it. So this is just the first part, and we will get to the later parts later. So we open up with a narration going over about 3 pages worth of unknown soldier, or just a seemingly normal soldier who's just got bandages all over his face and no identity, and he's breaking into a terrorist compound and just shooting a bunch of people. And the narration over top is like, okay, hi, I'm a third-party soldier. I'm writing to my dearest Darla, and I'm sharing the story of the unknown soldier. And apparently this group of soldiers were pinned down. They were like about to die. There were snipers trained on them, and they were unable to like get off any shots or anything like that. They found this guy, the unknown soldier, who they couldn't pin down. They had no idea who he was, but he was apparently on their side. And they were tagged down by the Taliban. And after the first day of them being pinned down, the unknown soldier just disappeared. And then they were still pinned down on the second day. But then on the third day, there was no fires. There was no shots fired anywhere. And on the fourth day, there still were no shots fired. So they're like, are we safe? Are we good to go? And then on the fifth day, the unknown soldier rode in on a white horse carrying all of these guns and munitions from the snipers. Because apparently those pages of him showing him breaking into a terrorist compound, that was him just going and killing all of them. Just no problem whatsoever. And they were like, look, so after that, a week passed and we discovered another Taliban like outpost. And at that point, we totally believed this dude was like our savior. Like if he wanted to go fight the devil, we would go with him into hell. But we made our way into this terrorist compound, which is against protocol because apparently you need to have like drones and stuff do whatever. But we just went in there, we killed everyone inside, and then we found millions of dollars of heroin, which I guess they were selling. So as soon as the top dogs heard about that, they had some questions for the unknown soldier. So they called him up out of the ranks and into an office, and they're like, all right, here's the deal. You say you have amnesia, and fine, whatever, but we've done a whole bunch of like checks and stuff with other groups in order to find out exactly who you are. So go ahead and put your hand on the handprint scanner, and we're going to get exactly what's going on. And he does so, and he's like, all right, tell me how you got here. And he doesn't reveal exactly what happened or exactly what came up on the screen, but it's revealed that he probably doesn't have amnesia and he knows exactly what's going on. So 2005, him and his family are in the UK. He doesn't actually get a name here, but I'm just to say the unknown soldier. He was in the UK, and his family, his wife, his daughter, and his son were all going down into the tunnel, into the metro line, and he kisses him goodbye, waves goodbye to him, and as soon as the train pulls away from the station, it explodes. And it was a terrorist attack that blew up a train. And at that point, he's sad. He tries to commit suicide, but doesn't go through with it. But he does, it was an attempted suicide, so he goes to the hospital, whatever, he gets dealt with that. But then he goes to the army, and he's like, hey, I want to fight. I want to take the fight to them. I want to get revenge. And they're like, look, we admire your spunk, but you have an attempted suicide, and so you're not mentally fit to do so. So, no, you're not a part of the U.S. military. So then he flies down to South Africa and joins their military, because I guess not so much record sharing there. And he's like, look, I don't, his top guy is like, look, I don't doubt that you have the desire and the goal to do this, but it's going to be a lot of training before you so much as even get to step foot over there. And then, years pass. He finally does, after 5 years, get to go over there. And they're going out on a general patrol sweep, him and his crew. But then they're fired upon, and they are taking heavy shots. And as they are trying to react as best they can, the truck they're in gets blown up by an RPG. And it just horribly burns the face of our main guy. And as the terrorists come up to check out, see if there's anything they can salvage from it, he's playing dead, and when one of them finally comes up behind him, he flips around, unloads shots on all of them, and kills literally everyone there. So another crew comes up, and sees them there and sees that he's still alive, but he is horribly wounded on his face, and they need to get him to a medevac immediately. So then we cut back to the interview with the top brass, and they're like, all right, so here's the deal. We get that you have nothing to lose and you have a goal and are driven, and as such, we think that you can be a very good asset, but we don't want you there in Afghanistan. We have other places for you to go. So we have some top secret thing, and you have now been recruited. And that's where we leave off. So it's fine. It's good. It sets up the origin very quickly of saying, like, yep, he got his training. He may or may not. Like, it sounds like they know who he is. I'm not sure if he knows who he is. It was unclear as to who was telling that flashback story, because obviously there's certain stuff that, like, the military wouldn't know and only he would know, but he says he has amnesia, so does he even know it, or is he lying to us as the audience? I don't know. Regardless, it was fine. It was a fine intro to the character. I think that this really was just the exposition issue, and we will get the actual story itself kicking off next time. So overall, I'm going to give this one like a 6.5. It's fine. It's not great. It's not blowing me back. Art-wise, some stuff looks fine, but a lot of stuff is very, very sketchy, which I am not as big of a fan on unless it really suits the mood. And it somewhat does here, but there are other times where, he's sitting with the brass or whatever, and it's still very sketchy and it just doesn't really feel like it. And him, like, saying goodbye to his family. That didn't feel like it needed to be sketchy either, but it was. So, yeah, it's fine. It's just the exposition issue is all it really is. And we'll see what comes out of it after that. But, yeah, Unknown Soldier. And that, again, is it. That's all of the backup stories that have come out over the past 3 months. And as such, we are done with yet another 5th week. That being said, I want you guys to be aware that the next time there's a 5th week is going to be on episode number 52. So it's going to be a big one. I've already checked ahead, and it turns out there are 9 normal issues coming out that week on top of whatever backup stories I'm doing. So expect a very long episode. I cannot overstate that one. Regardless, let me tell you what's coming out next week for episode 40. We have the number 10 issues of Batwing, Detective Comics, Action Comics, Red Lanterns, Green Arrow, Justice League International, Stormwatch, Animal Man, and Swamp Thing. Additionally, we have the number 2 issues for Earth 2, World's Finest, GI Combat, and Dial H. And we have the number 4 issue of the miniseries Night Force. All that coming out next week, episode 40. As for this episode, I have no idea how long it is. Normally, I have some sense of, am I over on time? Am I under on time? But because of how absolutely wonky this episode's been, I hope this was at least some semblance of a normal episode. But either way, thank you very much for listening to it if you have. Twitter, almost forgot the contractual obligations part, is at DC Comics. At DC Comics Podcast. God, I wish we'd get at DC Comics. At DC Comics Podcast on Twitter. Patreon is Mild Fuzz TV for as low as $1. I don't know. You can lose $1. I think I've said that like 5 times already, but I genuinely am out of creativity on these ending bits. But yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for listening if you have been. I will see you all next week and or next 5th week. And always remember, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.